We continue on now to Korea Book Club, our weekly dive into the world of Korean literature through works available in translation and beyond. And for that, we welcome, of course, our literary critic Barry Welsh, who has joined us now in the studio. Barry, hello, and hope you're doing well.
Yes, good evening.
So what are you introducing us to today?
So today we're reviewing a short story called The Age of Doubt by Pak Kyongni and translated by Anton Her and published by Honford Star. The Age of Doubt, or the Korean title is 불신시대, is the title story in a new collection of Pak's short stories. The English translation was published just last year, late last year I believe, and each story in the collection is translated by a different translator. So the title story is translated by Anton Her, but there's other translators which regular listeners will recognise as well. So there's also stories translated by people like Sophie Bowman and Emily Ye Won. And the Korean collection was published in 2021, but the stories in this collection, they actually date from between 1955 and around 1968. And Pak is a seminal figure in Korean literature. She was born in 1926, passed away in 2008, and she's most famous for a sprawling, vast multi-volume saga called Soil, or Toji, which was published over 25 years, a quarter of a century, from 1969 to 1994, and it covered historical changes in Korea in the first half of the 20th century. And so this collection, the Age of Doubt collection, I think this is an attempt to highlight the importance of Pak's shorter works that she produced before she embarked on this career-defining epic. And this story and much of the other stories in the collection, they're set in the aftermath of the Korean War. And The Age of Doubt, it depicts a war widow who's struggling to survive in the extremely harsh post-war conditions.
Yes, we've reviewed many stories and novels about this period in Korean history. It was a time of great upheaval, of course, as the country attempted to rebuild after the devastation of the Korean War. So how does Pak Kyongni then depict this turbulent time in Korean history?
Right, so this is a story about the horror of post-war life in a devastated Seoul. The capital city was devastated during the Korean War, and it's about how does a woman survive in this, destroyed landscape of a country and city trying to recover from this terrible tragedy of the war. And Pak was drawing on her own life experiences in this story. Her husband and son both died shortly after the outbreak of war. And so we can see how she draws on this in the opening sentence of the story, in which the narrator says, "The night before the Second Battle of Seoul, a bomb killed Jin Young's husband." And that, terse, matter-of-fact tone continues throughout the story. We quickly learn that Jin Young's house was also destroyed in the fighting, and that her 9-year-old son died because of an incompetent doctor who didn't treat him correctly after an accident in the street. So very much drawing on experiences that Pak herself had. We catch up with Jin Young a month after she's suffered this latest tragedy of her child dying. She's sick with consumption, she's drinking to help her sleep, and she's haunted by the death of her only child. She says in her dreams, she hurries through a maze of alleyways looking for her child until she sees him wrapped in so many bandages she can't make out his eyes or nose or mouth. So how is Jin Young to deal with this deep and profound sadness? Where can she turn for consolation? And over the course of the story, she will turn to religion, to community, to medical professionals and her family, and find all to be corrupt and incompetent.
Wow, so it's a very bleak view then.
Yes.
Let's tackle some of those elements. Tell us first about the religious aspect. What problems does Jin Young experience when she tries to seek comfort from religion?
Right, so this is the main sort of avenue of the story, I guess. So in the first instance, she turns to Christianity, and attends the nearby Catholic church. She goes there with a very devout family member, I guess a kind of auntie, and she explains, "I'm not going because of my salvation. I just want to think there's a heaven and that my Munsu is happy there," Munsu being her son. However, her experience at the church is very disappointing. She can't help but view this religious service and experience through cynical and jaded eyes. She can't help but feel like, she says, a traveller in a strange land. And all the while that she's in the church, she has this interior monologue going on in her head, and this monologue is sort of full of mockery for what she sees and full of self-loathing. And no matter how much she wants to lose herself in the religious fervour that the other attendees seem to be experiencing, she just can't seem to do it. And she says she yearns to step away from this objective self-image and struggles to immerse herself in an ideal, but her forced intentions refuse to set in her heart. And so this experience is a failure for her. It doesn't work, and she turns away from the Catholic Church, finding that it doesn't offer any meaning or comfort.
Right, I see. I understand that Christianity is not the only religion she turns to in the story. What does the story say about Buddhism as well? Yeah,
right. So the story is equally critical and just as cynical about the Buddhist practitioners that she meets. So the monks are just as corrupt as the servants in the Catholic Church. And again, we find this critique of organised religion, which is essentially exploiting these desperate and often traumatised people for financial gain. And so Jin Young goes with her mother to the Buddhist temple on All Souls Day to give a food offering to her for her dead son. The monks, however, they want to squeeze them in as quickly as possible before a more important and wealthier member of the community arrives, and they cut the service short for Jin Young's son when this person does arrive, and then they complain that Jin Young and her mother, they haven't given a sizable enough donation. And so again, Jin Young is full of cynicism when she realises there's nothing really spiritual there. It's all a lie. And as she leaves, she bursts into tears, and Pak writes that the loneliness and longing surges up inside her into near madness. And so we see this sort of complete failure of these two religions to offer anything genuinely meaningful. There's no comfort or solace. Instead, there's just exploitation. And it's a very damning characterization of religious belief and practice.
Yes, indeed, very cynical. Pak also writes about corruption in other areas of the protagonist's life. Where else does corruption manifest in the post-war society? Right,
yes. So the main area where we see this sort of inhuman exploitation and corruption is among medical practitioners. So I think most of us, we'd like to think that, as with religious figures, that doctors and nurses are beyond reproach. They act in their patients' best interests. However, Pak writes that the desperation of the post-war years has corrupted this as well. It has even made the doctors and nurses into unscrupulous people who are trying to cut corners and make money on the side. And so again, we see the sort of failing of this institution that we'd like to think we could rely on. But Park doesn't stop there either. The story also, criticises Jin Young's family members. They're equally lost and misguided in their own ways. And it's almost as if she's saying there's, at this point or in these circumstances, there is no ethical way to live. And so what do you do if you're an honest or moral person? How do you live and survive? And so in its portrayal of one such woman and her search for some kind of meaning, we just see this very damning criticism and analysis of post-war Korean society.
Right, as we said at the start, it's a very bleak assessment of life in post-war Korea. Depicting more the sense of hopelessness, I feel. But it sounds like quite a tough read, but perhaps compelling, especially because of its historical value as well, I guess, looking back at it now.
Right, it is certainly compelling. I thought it was... the translation is very engaging. Like I said at the beginning, it has this sort of terse matter-of-factness to it, and there's a clarity to her psychological state that's very engaging. And it's very sharp and very cutting, and it has a very, I think, useful analysis, let's say.
Right, well, once again, it's called The Age of Doubt by Pak Kyongni. That is where we'll leave it for today. Barry, thank you for that review, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, take care.